Kristina, is that noodles? Stop being so Asian. Wow, Kristina, reading a book? So studious.
Where do all these stereotypes come from?
If someone asked you to define the word media, what would you say? The proper definition is the means of mass communication, especially television, the newspaper, the radio, and the internet. To me, the media is simply the information we take in that surrounds us. A study published in 2009 proves that adults and children spend about 8 hours a day on screens. That's 8 hours of information being sent to us by the media. How do we know this information is true? Could someone be making this up, or rather, creating a false image for something? The answer to this question is yes. In our country, this is usually targeted towards African Americans. Americans have been making incorrect accusations through the media since the beginning of our nation. One would think our country has moved on from such terrible accusations, but no. Our media is still patronizing African Americans for anything they can possibly think of. When did these stereotypes come from? Obviously, there is no actual date. However, when Europeans first arrived in Africa, Africans were judged by their outer appearance and were seen as inferiors. Most Europeans thought this was because of their color, as Timothy J. Brown states in his Journal of Intercultural Research in 2005. Whiteness became associated with positive meanings, such as life and superiority, and blackness became associated with negative meanings, such as death and dirtiness. History of African American stereotypes were generalized in the popular media. A perfect example is Walt Disney's classic movie Dumbo. In this 1940s classic, there are several scenes that display African American stereotypes. The opening scene pictures black, faceless men singing a song called Yes Sir, which can stereotype that African American slaves were ignorant and happily followed their master's every command. Another example of racism in the movie is a group of crows that appear several times. The leader of the crows is named Jim Crow, which leads me to my next example of Jim Crow and the Jim Crow laws. During the 1830s and 40s, an American actor named Thomas Dartmouth Rice painted his face black and acted foolish in front of an audience. He sung 2 songs called Negro Ditties and Jump Jim Crow. His act lasted about 60 years. After his act died out, southern states began creating laws about racial segregation. These laws were called Jim Crow laws. Obviously, you can see that it supported the African American stereotypes. The act that portrayed racial stereotypes became so popular that it affected the Southern American government. It is proof that the media can convince society that something is true, especially something they have no knowledge
The
about.
media portrays African Americans incorrectly because of the historical values that negatively impacted African Americans. Similar to what Marcus Garvey said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without its roots. This quote expresses how the past affects the future. Therefore, African Americans are still being portrayed as monsters or unintelligent people in movies like those during the Jim Crow laws. For example, African Americans are usually playing the roles of criminals while whites play the roles of those who were educated. To give you a view of the roles, the article Journal of Negro Education in 2003 states that the roles of secretary, boss, doctor, and police officers played by white people in the United States were 79%, 71%, 67%, and 53% on TV, while the roles of criminal played by African Americans were 59%, 35% for maid, and 35% for janitor. This is because African Americans were once viewed this way. The roles of the maid and janitor is played by African Americans because they were once slaves. With this being said, they are still looked down upon because of how the media chooses to portray them. Another example is an article Mass Media and Racism from Yale University in 1999 states that the media focuses on a negative side of the African American community, saying that young black men are involved with drug usage and other criminal activities. This is very stereotypical because not all African Americans are criminals and drug dealers. However, they are portrayed heavily this way on television, and people began to believe in what they see. In 1991, the National Race Surveys showed that majority white American and African American agree that blacks are aggressive and violent. Thus, the media swayed the audience to think this way, And it also is a bad influence for kids, as the article Mass Media and Racism states. As a result of such treatment, the media have crushed youth prospects for future employment and advancement. And now the changing situation, the media makes African Americans look more negative. But what is even worse is the media lacks color. It only shows white or black majority. Without the other colors, it creates stereotype relating to other minorities other than African Americans. People of other color are lacked in the media, such as shown in MSNBC News in 2013. 19% African Americans are shown in the evening news and 3% Asian, 2% Latino. As a whole, all minorities are affected. Now, this goes back to the question, why does the media portray African Americans as villains and not an Asian villain?
There are times when people come to me and say, "Stop being so Asian." I will start to feel uncomfortable because I know that being Asian does not define my work ethic. Why have an A when you can have an A+ if you just do your homework? This thought is just my principle. But these stereotypical views of Asian made Asian Americans become known as model minority. Started in 1966 by William Peterson, and labeled Asian as a minority who works hard, never complains, smart, and rich. This stereotype became popular with the help of U.S. News, World Report, and Time magazine publishing articles. So at the end of the day, the media only spread awareness how Asian Americans are smart, unlike the way how they portray African Americans. In 1990s, there was a research regarding on a newscast in Chicago. It was found that African Americans are appeared in news more likely in mugshots or being handcuffed by white policemen. Thus, it only made sense for the public to see the villain having a darker skin tone than seeing an Asian villain. You may say that Asians are likely to be portrayed as a model, but I disagree. Being portrayed less and less bad doesn't mean that the media portrays the stereotypes correctly, and in fact, it hurts our pride of being an Asian. Just like how other stereotypes hurt other races. For example, Asians are smart. But through research, 33% of Asian Americans actually fail before graduating from high school. And to disagree, in 2004, about 11% of Asian Americans live below the poverty line. Our achievement or failures are not supposed to be labeled as Asians. The media affects all races.
That being said, has anyone heard of the term a melting pot society? This term describes America as a multicultural society, where all ethnic groups, cultures, and religions blend together. However, this term is just fantasy. America's society is more like a salad bowl. All culture is bounded by land, but at the same time, all culture still remains individual. For example, everyone can evidence that in Central High School there is the Asian group, the white group, the black group, the Latino group, etc. Even though we know Central is one of the most diverse schools in the city, isolation still exists based on race. The isolation exists because of stereotypical views in which the media portrays us. The media robs the minority's voice to speak up the truth to the audience. It robs America's chances to become a harmonious picture of culture, and utmostly, it hinders America's knowledge of other cultures besides relating African Americans to violence, Asian to smartness, Hispanics to wetbacks, and Arabics to 9/11. Currently, the majority of Americans are living in a box surrounded by stereotypes. As the current generation, it is our job to help each other get out of the box and start making a change to America's culture, beginning with the media.
After this presentation, I would like for everyone to think about their view for other races. This means that the next time you watch a movie, don't be too quick to judge. You will see that not all African Americans are always the villains. Maybe the villain lies within you. This is essential to our younger generation so that their life will be like a rainbow, exposed to all types of color, from white to black to yellow to peach and to numerous others. So melting pot can be real, so that the future generation could watch the media and say, I want to be like him or her, knowing that the protagonist's role could be achieved without bias. So now, we should start leading the future and changing the media. Thank you again.